Well, after watching day 2 and day 3 of the Theodore Edgecomb trial, the crow's been defrosted, but I'm not yet ready to eat it. There's still time. Hello again, everybody. Sean Martin, attorney at law, and today we're talking about day 2 and day 3 of the Theodore Edgecomb trial. Stuff came up yesterday, so I had to condense both days into one video. First things first, there's something I need to get out of the way. First, it's an apology. It's an apology to Jason Clearman. I've been calling you Jerry. I'm very sorry. I'm very sorry to your family. You deserve to be at least named the way you were given, and going forward, I should be able to call you Jason and not screw that up. Day 2 finished jury selection in the morning. In the afternoon started opening arguments. Both sides were very short and sweet. The state went first, very concise. I thought a very clean and very powerful argument. Then the defense went up, and they started off swinging.
Do you see my hand? Do you see my whole hand? Or do you only see the side that I'm showing to you? For over almost 1.5 years, there's only been one side of this story that has been advanced by the government, by the media, but today, members of the jury, this week, you will now hear the other side of the story. There's been many interviews by alleged victims in this case, but there's one victim who has not said one word yet, and that is Mr. Theodore Edgecomb.
You know, I like this. I like where it's going. I like how they're trying to get this narrative set. Surely they can't fuck it up.
Well, members of the jury, here's the other side. Welcome to the dark side. Welcome to the side where a woman who is married to her husband for over 25 years, where she sees her husband laying on the ground, never tries to save his life, never tries to apply pressure to stop any bleeding. The evidence is going to show in this case she never administered CPR. She never took one physical act whatsoever to try to save the man she claims and purports to love.
Well, shit. I guess it's going to be one of those days. I mean, they can't get worse, right? That's a pretty low point, begging on a woman for not taking care of her husband as he's dead.
You will not hear evidence in this case that during the time frame of 6 months that Mr. Edgecomb was not apprehended, that he was somewhere on the beach drinking mimosas. You're not going to hear that. You're not going to hear that he was having some grand vacation or having a grand time over the course of these 6 months. What you're going to hear is that Mr. Edgecomb was actively seeking legal representation.
Like, you know, I'm trying to be professional here, but holy shit, are you fucking for real? That's the argument you're going to propose for him running off, not he ran off because he was scared and just that was it? He spent 6 months trying to find a lawyer? Man, I'm trying to be on your side here, but god damn, that's hard. So we start off in day 2 with witnesses after the opening arguments. They have the first officer on the scene, and her body cam shows paramedics and firefighters working on Jason Clearman, and just the overall view of the crime scene and the kind of the vibe for it. It was dark out. That was really the big thing we got out of it. The next person up was the lead detective. I'm going to call him Detective K because I can't pronounce his name. It looked like a pretty standard homicide. Direct examination. He talked about what they did, what they found, and the lead up to how they identified Theodore. It's when the defense got up that, well, it sounds like they were starting to make something that we need to pay attention to. It was during this cross-examination that the defense brought up the fact that all of the footage, and I alluded to this earlier, that the first confrontation was likely caught on video, but nobody had footage of it, and the police were the most likely party to have that footage. So the defense brought up the fact that that footage wasn't available. And the detective's answer was, it was not my job, I wasn't in charge of that, and other people may have it. So I understand where the defense is going with this. They did a very poor job of it. They didn't do a really good job of showing, hey, this likely could be exculpatory, why don't we have it? Now, why is this an important strategy? because juries don't like it if they find out the police were sloppy. Why? Well, the jury wants all the evidence. More importantly, if there's potential evidence out there that could help this guy and the police didn't go get it, well, now it looks like the police have an agenda and that they're being vindictive. And it's a great way to get the jury on your side and very pissed off at the prosecution. But they didn't really do a good job of that. His attorney kind of flubbed his way through it. And, we all have off days. It's just, you don't really want to have your off day during a murder trial. Detective K was still on the stand at the end of day 2. He began day 3. The defense then did try to bring up the disparity in size. The detective wasn't really helpful. Of course he's not going to be helpful. He's trained on how to testify, so it really didn't go anywhere. They did try to bring up whether or not a vehicle could be used as a deadly weapon. And once again, they didn't answer it the right way. They didn't ask the right questions. So once again, the judge shut them down because they weren't going anywhere. So Detective K then left the stand. The first new witness on day 3 was Rotrell Cameron. And this is the guy who now pulls up to Jason Clearman after he is shot. Mr. Cameron saw the shooting and drove around the block real quick because he was kind of like scared and panicking about what was going on. I think most people would be. The interesting thing about Mr. Cameron was he was in custody. Why? Because he was a material witness and the prosecution believed he wouldn't show up. So what did they get? They got a warrant, and that warrant allowed him to be jailed until he testified. Now that's a very rare thing to happen. Especially, this isn't the crime of the century, this isn't OJ, but somehow they got it in. And I thought it was a little weird, a little sketchy on the state's part, because the guy even admitted, I'd be here, I just don't have the time to come in and talk to you. But he came in and testified and got out. So what did we learn from him? Well, Mr. Cameron saw the punch. He saw the first punch, and he wanted to see what was going to happen. So he followed him around the corner. And once he got around the corner, he was probably within 30 to 40 feet of everything. Initially he said 15 to 20, but then it got clarified probably more like 30 or 40, and I think the video supports that. And he said that he watched the Clearman's car force Theodore off the road. And he said it looked like they tried to corner him, and it looked like they were getting ready to fight. So what happened? He said that Jason got out of the car, and as soon as he got out of the car, he came up to Theodore and squared off. And as soon as he squared off, Theodore pulled out the gun and shot him in the face. Cameron further testifies that he didn't see Jason have a knife or anything in his hands. He said he didn't see him throw a punch. He didn't hear anything being yelled. In fact, nothing happened except him being shot. And Cameron went on further to label the shooting as cold-blooded. And Cameron stated he was very hysterical. This was crazy. He was a little scared himself, having just seen this man die. Then later, the defense tried to bring up the fact that Mr. Cameron never came and talked to the defense, and he only talked to the state. Now, that was to show bias. Now, I bring that up because you're going to hear about this later in a very important thing. Once again, the defense tried to claim he never came and talked to the defense attorneys, but he only talked to the police. All in all, Mr. Cameron's testimony wasn't very good for Theodore. Doesn't really get much better the rest of the day. Later into day 3, which is today, we had witness Jeffrey Parr, who owned a restaurant down the road. He was about 300 feet away from the shooting when it happened. He said he saw the car swerve towards the bike, and then later in his testimony he said it wasn't necessarily a swerve, but it was directed. Either way, the car went towards the bike. And that he saw Jason get out and walk towards Theodore. And then he saw Theodore shoot Jason. Pretty simple. There wasn't a whole lot to his testimony. They took a break, and then something very important happened with the defense. Theodore Edgecomb has 2 attorneys, but Ivory Lamar and Anik Ahmad. Now, they are not working in the same law firm. In fact, they work for separate firms, and really they're just on their own. But they teamed up on this case. And it turns out that Attorney Ahmad had talked to Mr. Cameron through his paralegal or private investigator. But Attorney Lamar had not. So what happened on the stand? Well, Attorney Lamar asked a materially misleading question because it turns out he had spoken to the defense. In an attempt to raise bias, that wasn't true. Now, it doesn't work that they are from separate firms and they don't know what they're doing. It doesn't work that way. When 2 firms team up in a case, you're responsible for each other. The right hand and the left hand do know and have to know what each other are doing. Especially in a case like this where you're claiming somebody doesn't have the cooperation of one side. Because if you don't, now you're lying. And that's misleading, and it's misleading before the court. Attorneys have a duty to candor. So now the judge, well, let's say it this way. The judge was really fucking mad, to say the least. And what else does this show? These guys are really incompetent. They don't talk to each other. How do they not know who they've talked to? And it's not a little slip up. This guy is one of the biggest witnesses so far. And yet, they weren't on the same page. And they tried to explain their way out of it, and it didn't go very well. The judge took a break. When he came back, he didn't sanction them. He could have fined them, held them in contempt, any number of things. He didn't do that. But he was very pissed off. Now, this isn't helpful for Theodore. Why? Well, now the judge thinks the attorneys are lying. He's not going to take their word for anything. On top of that, if it comes to something where they try to give somebody the benefit of the doubt, if the attorneys are making arguments, well, he's going to think they're lying. And if he doesn't think they're lying, he's going to be pissed off at them. He's upset with them. They might not win an argument solely because of that. When you're trying to award somebody who's got the best side in the debate, well, this guy's been completely clean with you. This guy's lied and made some shit up. Well, who are you going to go with? On top of the poor questioning and the poor cross-examination for some of these witnesses, it just shows that they're unprepared. That's a tragedy for Theodore, because these are the guys he's trusting his life with at this point. For those of you thinking, wow, he's in deep shit, don't worry, it gets a lot fucking worse. Mr. Parr gets back up on the stand for a little bit, finishes testimony, and is done. And then his employee, Jose Perez, comes up and testifies. He testifies very much to similar things, that the car cut off Theodore, and that Jason moved with a purpose, that he wasn't necessarily running, but he was walking towards Theodore like something was going to happen. He did try to claim that Jason had empty hands, but he also admitted he was about 200, 300 feet away. So it's dark. You don't know what 300 feet, you can't tell. But overall, he did say, and then Theodore shot him. So, once again, these stories are starting to mesh. And one more thing before I forget about it. The reason why the issue about open hands keeps coming up. Theodore is going to allege, when he takes the stand, that Jason had his knife. Well, it turns out Jason does have a knife. He had a knife in his pocket. But it doesn't look like it was ever opened, and it looked like it stayed in his pocket the whole time. Now, there might be other evidence coming out in the next couple of days, but for right now, this is not looking good for Theodore. Next up was the fingerprint technician from the Milwaukee police. She was great. She pointed out they didn't really have any prints they could get off things, and that's not really abnormal. It's hard to get fingerprints. It's hard to get fingerprints off of anything. It takes very special conditions, but when you can get them, they're very helpful. Next up was the officer in charge of finding all the camera footage, Officer Howard. Now, you remember when I said before that it's going to get a lot worse? This is the part where it gets a lot worse. Officer Howard explains that she went to many of the businesses in the area to try to find security camera footage of Theodore and the Clearmans in that first incident. Why? Well, because it sounds like that's part of what happened here. And the defense's story is that Theodore was riding his bike in traffic when the Clearmans almost ran into him and forced him up on crash into another car. And that started the whole chain of events. Well, I think we'd like to see that. I know you would. So the police actually learned about it, and they went to go back and try to find these things. And why did they do that? Because they knew they had the footage of the punch. The punch they had, and they went back as far as they could. They couldn't find anything. Well, now we find the lady who shows, I couldn't find anything. She explains that she went and talked to many, many businesses, and she explains that everything she did was on her body cam, and that body camera footage was provided to the prosecution, which means it was provided to the defense. This is a witness that the defense would also know about, and they've likely had this footage. So this entire theory of their case that there's mystery footage the police are hiding and that it's a giant conspiracy, well, it's a complete fucking lie. It's completely wrong. This wasn't a surprise witness. This wasn't a gotcha. They knew about this. They had it. Because obviously they didn't object and say, we've never seen this before. They had it. So what did they do? Well, they initially laid a theory that there's extra evidence out there that would exonerate their client. But it turns out they fucking lied. They completely lied. When I said these guys are bad, they are bad. I don't know how to say this, but God almighty, this borders on malpractice. mean, this is really bad. You can get 2 guys out of law school, like 2 brand new public defenders. They'd probably do a better job for Theodore at this case. And honest to God, if Theodore, you're listening, your family's listening, fuck, fire these guys. I mean, it's too late to fire them, but I mean, if you could, you definitely should. These guys are bad. They're not going to help you. And yeah, at this point, you probably are going to get convicted because they are not doing you any favors. Absent some massive, brilliant thing that happens, yeah, this is probably it. And then finally, the medical examiner testified. He talked about Jason's autopsy. There were some pictures put up. We did not see them online, but I understand that's an issue of publishing gory stuff for the news. But, he was dead. He got shot. It's clear there was stippling. It was close range. It also turns out that Jason had a blood alcohol level of 0.12. So, he was pretty drunk. You could say he's being aggressive. It wouldn't be surprising. It's not the first time in history a guy that drunk got into a fight. Now, I sit here and I've talked shit about his attorneys because I don't think they're doing a good job. Would I have been able to do it better than what they're doing? I don't know. Would it change the outcome of the trial? I don't know. But certainly, I would have made a different tact. I would have picked a different way to go about this. Because trying to lie and then having the jury find out you're lying doesn't get you anywhere. There's other ways they could have argued things, and I think they could have argued them better. So, yes. Do I think that I could have done a different job? Yes. Could I have done it without trying to lie? Yeah. And it's a shame that his attorneys are doing this because I think Theodore still has some things we can use in his defense. It was dark. He actually was backed up to a staircase. Jason Clearman had a blood alcohol level of 0.12. There were a lot of things that come in his favor. A lot of the witnesses agree that car came after him with a purpose. So yes, I think there's a lot he could have used, but his attorneys are pissing it away. So that's it for today. We'll recap tomorrow. And actually, I might try to live stream tomorrow. I don't know how it's going to work. I'll probably boomer this up somehow, so who knows. Otherwise, guys, just tune in tomorrow night. And remember, until next time, just because you did it doesn't mean you're guilty.